Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Haydn Smith. He's a film journalist, critic, journalist, as I said, and writer. He's in Armenia in the framework of the 16th edition of the British Film Festival that is taking place from February 15 to February 21 here in Yerevan. Welcome, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
So how could you describe British movies? Because this festival is also putting in the spotlight the British movies. How would you describe the British movies and what makes them so special compared to movies from other countries?
I think British cinema at one point in time internationally was perceived to be one of two things. It was either about posh people living in very large country houses, or it was about people living on council estates struggling to survive. So on one end you had a series of films by producers called Merchant Ivory, which were these beautiful adaptations of writers such as E.M. Forster, and they charted the lives of quite wealthy people. And it dealt with some civil issues and social issues, but people were drawn to these films because of the way they looked and these incredible lives that they portrayed. The other side of that is a director such as Ken Loach or another director, Mike Leigh, who were more interested in documenting the lives of people struggling on the breadline, trying to survive in predominantly contemporary Britain. But what's happened really, if you dig deeper, is that there's so much more going on in British cinema. And I think, like many countries around the world at the moment, Britain is grappling with diversity, both in terms of gender and in terms of race. There's a long way to go, but I think the films showing this week show that there is an attempt to look at all aspects of British life, all walks of British life. So you have a documentary about an Afro-Caribbean man who came over from Jamaica when he was very young to live in Britain, and shows his life over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. And that's directed by Molly Dineen, who's one of the great British documentary filmmakers. And then you have your Downton Abbeys, which is the closing night film of the festival, which is the film adaptation of the hugely popular television series, which looks perhaps a little more stereotypically at that upper class British life and the servants who work for those people. But there's so many different things going on in this festival that chart these different aspects of life. So I'd say at the moment that British cinema is attempting and continuing to expand its focus and its range, which I think can only be a good thing.
Does that focus also, so we saw that for the Oscars they gave the prize to Parasite, and so it was a way to pay tribute to foreign countries and foreign directors, but do you think that, so the tendency is more going to minorities and, as you said, genders, to women, maybe more empowering? So would we say that movies are really pretty related and bound to political issues or what's going on in the societies actually?
I think the director of Parasite, Bong Joon-ho, made a really good comment when he said that the only obstacle to enjoying a film like Parasite is getting used to reading the subtitles. But once you get past the subtitles, you enter a whole new realm of great cinema. And great cinema, I think, is the essential thing. It doesn't matter where it comes from. If it's great cinema, that's the thing that we should be championing. But we should also accept that great cinema doesn't come from one single group in society. It can come from any corner of society. And it's somewhat interesting that in the last 24 hours at one of his rallies in Colorado, Donald Trump has actually attacked the Oscars for giving the prize to Parasite, saying that we already have economic issues and trade issues with South Korea. Why the hell are they giving an Oscar to it? Well, he hasn't seen the film, because if he had, he would understand this is a film about social inequality, and this is something that's affecting countries all around the world. It's affecting America, it's affecting the UK as much as it's affecting South Korea. And I think that's the thing about cinema that is important and should be emphasized all the time. You might be telling the story of someone who lives in Britain, someone who lives in Brixton, in south of London, but in actual fact, what you'll find if you dig deep enough, that story has a universal appeal. It tells the story of many people around the world. And I think that's what cinema can do brilliantly. It can reach out to people, but it can also make people realize that we're not that dissimilar. I had an experience in 2011 when Asghar Farhadi, the great Iranian filmmaker's film A Separation came out, which won the best foreign language film at the Oscars. A fantastic film, but it was shown to a group of students, 12 to 16-year-olds, and their reaction was not, this is scary Iran, this is a place that we've been told is the enemy. What they saw were the lives of ordinary people with ordinary everyday problems like their parents. And they were just people trying to live their life as best they could. And I think that's what cinema can do really well. It can tell people that we're not different. We actually have more in common than we have in opposition to each other. And I think that's a really good thing.
So in Armenia, so as I said, in the framework of the British Film Festival, you met also with students from educational institutions, including the Yerevan State Institute of Theatre and Cinema. What topic did you decide to talk with them and to tackle in general? What was the issue that you wanted to talk about with them as a film critic?
The remit in my conversation before I came here with the British Council was to talk about British film, but also I think the thing that the British Council does and does brilliantly is not to have one-way traffic across a bridge. It is a bridge that's being built with cultures, and the whole point is to have a discussion. So this time we thought it would be a great idea, rather than going in and speaking to the students, to actually ask them questions and have a discussion. And so, as well as that institute, I went to the Russian and Armenian University, the Pedagogical University, and what I found is students who just really want to talk, not only about films that they like and films that they'd like to make, but how their life experience can feed into those films. And so it was less a series of lectures and more my sat down, just chatting with the students. Occasionally we would see film clips and talk about them and try and work out what's being said in them. But it was just great, a learning experience as much for me to actually sit there and hear them talk about what they wanted to do, what their ambitions are, and how they can filter their own life experience through the medium of film.
In this case, what makes the Armenian students different from other people or other students that you might have met in your life in general? What's the situation here in Armenia according to the issues that they face?
I'm not sure it's different. I think because everyone's issues are their own and they're important to them, and they're no more or less important than anyone else's. I think the thing that I love coming over here for, and I've been here a few times before, once in 2013 with the British Council to spend a week with one group of students, is to actually see them hungry to want to do something. You know, so far of the people I've met, I've already been sent 3 films by the students. One of the lecturers, a professor at both the Pedagogical University and the Russian Armenian University, he sent me his short film, which I think is extraordinary. And I think that's the thing that's really interesting is to see people who are really hungry to create art, to create generally. And it was interesting, yesterday I went to the museum of the great director of The Color of Pomegranates, Paitjan, and what's fascinating to walk around his house and see is that this is not someone who made a film or made some art. This is someone who lived and breathed art. Every aspect of their life was the subject of their art, and it's incredible to see them like be sent photos by friends or have a drawing sent by a friend or have someone around for dinner, and that becomes the subject of an artwork. And I think that's really interesting to see someone like that who's so inspiring, to see that same hunger in some of the students who just want to look at every part of their life and find a way to express that, which I think is wonderful.
Also, some people might say that people now in the 21st century have more access to movies, and people also have platforms where they criticize and they take your position and they criticize movies, right? And that some people also have YouTube that they use to have their own channel to talk about movies. So some might say that your work has become obsolete in some way, what would you reply to those people?
The democratization of anything, I think, is a really good thing to hear people's opinions. I write fewer reviews now because, to be quite honest, I don't like writing bad reviews. There are too many good films out there to spend all my time focusing on the bad ones. That's the role of a full-time reviewer and critic, and they have to do that. I think it's fine that people express their opinions online. I think where the role of a critic who has worked for some time or studied comes in is that it's not just an opinion, it's an incredibly informed opinion. And I'm not saying you have to study to do that. I'm not saying that you have to write for a newspaper to claim that legitimacy of being an informed critic. I know there are a lot of people who write online who are incredibly articulate and extremely knowledgeable about cinema and art in general. But I still think the role of critics, there is a provocation. Yeah, you should never agree with everything a critic says, and I would hope no one does. I think the role is to push you in a way to having your own opinion. So you may come out of a film and feel indifferently about it. You read what a critic writes, and you may be annoyed by what they say, and that makes you think about things. And I think you know the importance of critics when you read a really good one. And there are some very, very good critics out there. In the UK, unfortunately, one of the great theatre critics, Michael Billington, has retired or become a little more freelance rather than a regular critic. But every now and again I'll read something that he writes and I feel inspired by it. The American film critic Pauline Kael, sometimes I wondered if the criticism that she wrote of films was actually better than the films themselves, because she was so articulate and inflamed with passion about the cinema that she loved. And I think that's the role that will always remain legitimate and important, is that critics can make you respond sometimes as much as the film itself.
Let's go back to Armenia, and as you said, you've been here several times, and I think you've been here for the biggest, I think it's the biggest film festival of the Caucasus, in the Caucasus region, which is the Golden Apricot Film Festival, and it's taking place in summer. So you had the chance also to be part of a jury, I think, where you had to review also some documentaries. Can you tell us more about that experience and what you got from the movies you saw, from Armenian movies precisely?
It was 2009 edition of the Golden Apricot Film Festival. It was an incredibly hot summer. I just remember, and also a wonderful dry heat here rather than humidity. Although I was cooled off, I didn't know about an annual tradition here on a Sunday in late July, walking through a market, that I was suddenly surprised by someone pouring a whole bucket of water over my head.
Yeah, it's called Vartavar.
Which cooled me down, which was a very good thing. But the experience of a festival was wonderful. It was international films, so it wasn't just Armenian cinema. And the films that eventually won were from Burma and I believe from Ukraine and also India. What I saw of Armenian cinema, the documentary side of things, again, it showed great passion. And we didn't have too many Armenian films in the program. I think of the 15 or 20 films that we saw, there were only about 4 or 5 that were Armenian. One I particularly remember being about the landscape of Armenia and the human interaction with it, and particularly with the churches and the locations of the churches across the Armenian countryside, which was visually dazzling to see. And also, for someone coming to Armenia the first time, it was an incredible guide around to the locations outside of Yerevan. But the experience of the festival as a whole, I loved. I thought it was incredibly enthusiastic. The hosts at the time, both the head of the festival, the artistic director, were incredibly gracious and welcoming. And it's the same experience I've had. This is my 3rd time here. I've had that same experience of people being incredibly welcoming.
And what makes you come back?
I really like Yerevan.
What do you like about Yerevan?
I think I like cities on hills, for one. I feel the same way about Lisbon. I feel like I'm getting to look around and having a little bit of exercise at the same time. But I know that there were great changes architecturally in Yerevan in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so when I arrived in 2009, I think a lot of those changes had already taken place. So there was an incredible amount of modernization. But I love the idea of being able to walk around and see these large modern buildings and then suddenly finding an incredibly old building. And the juxtaposition of the two I found really fascinating. Also in the UK, we have statues. We have statues of famous people. We have statues to those lost in wars. But very, very few of the statues are on the immense scale that you not only have here in Yerevan, but in post-Soviet republics. And that's just something to marvel at, to see up on a hill, just these huge towers looming over you. I think Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square is probably the only really big, tall tower that we have, and in London particularly. And it's just wonderful to come here and see these huge monoliths. So it's a mixture of things, but most of all, like any place, it's the people. And in this, as well as working with students this week, I've been introducing each of the films in the evening that the British Council has programmed. And not an evening has gone by when someone hasn't walked up to me and wanted to talk about the film, which I think is the reason for showing these films, to have people discussing them.
Will you come back?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching us, and continue to follow CivilNet.